Welcome back, everyone. So, as I mentioned, we have basically, we're now beginning what I would say is our final session, which will be in two parts. We have two formal presentations by leading representatives from the professional care community with really long experiences in this field. So we're very privileged to have them engaged in our conversation here. And then we will open up to our sort of roundtable format where we'll invite all of our speakers to join as well. Our next speaker is Tay Jiva, who has worked with vulnerable children for over 20 years in various sectors. She has master's degrees in psychology, forensic psychology, and she is currently the quality assurance manager for UK fostering. In the past, she has set up a government-funded adoption and fostering equipment project, which worked alongside Coventry University to produce academic research on the topic of Muslim adoption and fostering, which we heard a little bit about in our keynote. And Tay Jiva is also a co-editor of the Islamic guidance report on adoption and fostering, which I highlighted in my presentation at the beginning as well. And that guidance report involved over 50 Muslim scholars, religious leaders in the UK, and numerous adoption and fostering professionals and caregivers. Tay received her MBE for this work, recognized just last year. Tay continues to work in this sector, most recently authoring a report on supporting vulnerable and looked after children through Ramadan, Islamic guidance with social work and medical perspectives. This report as well involved many Islamic leaders, social care professionals, and caregivers. So she is speaking today about prejudice and ignorance as barriers to the recruitment of Muslim adopters and foster carers, a social work practitioner's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Arafat. That was a very grand welcome. It's probably the grandest welcome I've ever had. So today we've heard a lot of really useful and interesting information from academics, which has been great. A lot of it's really new to me as well. My perspective, I'm not an academic, I'm a practitioner. So for me, I'm aware, and from looking at the chat as well, there are a number of people who are watching this and thinking, well, what can we do? Because in England, and it seems as well as many other countries, we're struggling and grappling with, encouraging Muslims to adopt and foster, and what the meaning is and how that fits with our identity. But particularly, I guess, for a lot of people who are listening, I know they're interested in where do we go from here in England and what's been done so far. So I'm going to talk about what my experience has been, the challenges that I've had, why I've been recruiting Muslim foster carers and adopters, what's worked well, and what I've had to overcome to do that, with a view to hopefully other people will learn from these lessons, and maybe it will make it easier for them to go ahead and perhaps do similar work or other work or better work in their area or nationally. So you've already outlined, I've only got one slide, just so you know, it's only 15 minutes maximum. I'm aware we're short of time. You've already outlined my qualifications and experience. I felt that's important to share because what I have come across in a number of places is people who don't have experience in the social care sector who are recruiting foster carers and adopters. Well-meaning, and I understand why they're trying to do it. But then what also happens is sometimes things end up being said that works against what social care is trying to achieve. So for example, I went to one talk, and this was really early on before I was recruiting Muslim foster carers and adopters. I went to a mosque where a foster carer was saying to Muslims in the room that as a foster carer, you have to be open to fostering children of any religion. And somebody asked the speaker, well, what if that child then becomes Muslim? And the way that the speaker pitched it was very much a kind of, well, that'd be good, wouldn't it? And as a social worker, I was mortified because I thought, well, actually, if we went to a church and somebody in the church said, oh, well, what if we get Muslim children and they become Christian? And the speaker at the front, if they said, well, that'd be great, we'd be horrified as Muslims. So there's things like that. I've recently seen some literature produced which said, and this was, quite widely disseminated literature. In one area, there was a mosque that produced guidance that literally said, the guidance was around NHS. So it wasn't even about adoption and fostering. They didn't have to include it in there. And this was literally only a couple of months ago. It had a title, Adoption, and it said one sentence, adoption is not permissible in Islam. And that was it. And I literally gasped when I saw it. I was like, oh my God, I thought we'd come a little bit further than this. But thankfully, now I have enough connections that I was able to get the phone number of the Imam of the mosque. I spoke to the Imam, fantastic. It wasn't the mosque that actually published it. It was somebody who published it on behalf of the mosque and then disseminated it to the NHS with the mosque logo on. But the Imam agreed to change the content of that and remove the section about adoption. There was another piece of literature, which again, really widely disseminated to fostering agencies, actually. So it's a Muslim organization that put in their literature, in Muslim homes, the man is the leader of the household. So whilst he has an obligation to consult with his partner, ultimately the final decision rests with him. And I just thought, for me, working in social care, having worked with so many families where there's domestic violence, what message is that sending out? And actually, this isn't representative of the wide range of Islamic views, of Muslim views. That was produced by a particular organization with a particular position Islamically. Somebody who's social work experienced would have picked up on that. And I did pick up on that. And I did then address that with the organization who was disseminating that information. So that for me is my first point, really. I know that there's social care professionals who are interested in getting into this work. One of the challenges for the social work professionals and the academics and Dr. Sariya, who's an adopter, for people who are really well versed, this is going to be one of the challenges of some other people who are working in the sector. They won't want their toes treaded on. So they won't want you to take over, but equally they might be saying things and doing things that aren't in line with mainstream social work practice. And actually what I would argue is good Islamic practice as well. So the reason that I actually went into recruiting Muslim foster carers and adopters, Dr. Sariya said in her presentation that she just sort of ended up there. And she just said that as a line. A lot of people probably miss that. But I very much feel the same. And it's not just ending up there, actually. I would say that, from a faith perspective, I feel very much that God took me there. So at the time that I had started thinking about getting involved in this sector, I was working for a fostering agency, not the one I'm working for now, a different fostering agency where there was clear discrimination against people of all faith. So there was the questions that were asked of me were the way they were asked and the reluctance to accept my answers about Islam and what it means to be Muslim. There were a number of things. The thing that actually then ended up ruining my relationship with that provider was the charity Penny Appeal, who I did a lot of my work with, recruitment work with. They approached me and asked if they could recruit Muslim foster carers and adopters, could they give all the referrals to the provider I was working for? And at the time, I thought, this is amazing. I get to have all these referrals. There was no cost involved. The only thing Penny Appeal requested was that when they make the referral, that these people are well looked after. So their applicants are handheld through the process. They feel supported, they feel understood, they feel the religion is understood. I thought, this is amazing for me. This is a boon. And that fostering organization said no explanation, just said they don't want the referrals. I called, and this was before the perceived refugee crisis when we were supposed to be flooded with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. We did get many, but not as many as we were expecting. So at that point, mainstream organizations were like, we don't really need Muslim foster carers. I called a number of other fostering providers and they said a similar thing. Some of them made comments like, well, we don't want carers for Muslim children. And I said, but I'm not asking you about carers for Muslim children. I'm asking you about Muslim applicants who will care for children of all faiths. So because of that barrier, and because of that kind of awareness that people, you know, within the sector, there is a lack of knowledge. Another thing as well that's been mentioned, and it's been mentioned in regards to another country from one of the other presenters, is about Muslim families taking care of their own. So a lot of social workers and a lot of people who are Muslim and non-Muslim have this perception that, well, there can't be Muslim children in the care system because Muslim families take care of their own. And it's with the research that Coventry University did. I did a Freedom of Information request quite early on as well, where we were able to show the numbers and say, actually, you're wrong. There's a significant number of Muslim children. So there was that sort of lack of knowledge within organizations as well. That then gave me the impetus and spurred me on to then join Penny Appeal and say, actually, we can't find fostering organizations who will take your referrals, but I will join you. Initially, to be fair, I only joined them for a few months I offered to join on a voluntary capacity, which is why I'm saying, you know, that I feel very much God guided me to this. I had no idea it was going to end up how it did end up. So I joined Penny Appeal and started setting up this work, did a TV series, which was a steep learning curve. So on YouTube, there's a series called My Muslim Fostering Family, which I filmed with British Muslim TV. I trained up people to take calls and take inquiries. So another obstacle for me along the way at that point was then partnering with other Muslim organizations. And I'm not going to name names because, you know, we're not doing that and it's water under the bridge. But again, it's something for people to be aware of, that I guess at that point, I was very, very naive about working with Muslim organizations and working on a management level with any organization. I'm sure it's the same everywhere. But I'll be honest, at that point, I was very open. I'm thinking in Muslim organizations, everyone's incentives, everyone's motivations will be the same, good-hearted, and there was a lot of politics, let's say that. So for me, as a social worker who prior to that had only worked as a social worker, to get involved at that management level, it was tricky. But the point being that whilst I had a really negative experience with another Muslim organization and I had particular challenges, at one point where I felt like I had really been taken advantage of, it was literally a few months after that we got funding from the Department for Education to set up a proper full-blown project. And again, for me, you know, from a faith-based perspective, I feel that was very much guided by Allah. And like, to somebody who's not strong in faith, that might not make sense. But I think for people who are strong in faith in their belief, they will understand that the way I got that funding, it's not something that's happened since then. And it was very unusual. And I felt very guided to do it. With that funding, we were able to commission the research from Coventry University. We were able to commission the Islamic guidance work, which Dr. Sariya has covered really well in terms of, you know, all the different things that were explored in that. And I had staff in the Midlands and I had staff in Wakefield. The head office was in Wakefield, but our work was centered in the Midlands. And over the space of a year, we did over 100 events. So most of those events were recruitment events that we did ourselves. So we booked a venue, we turned up, we talked. Some of those events were coming to like Eid events or community events and having a stall at the event. But it was intense. In terms of the number of events, I have to give credit to the staff for that. I did not plan to do 100 events, but the staff were really motivated and passionate to do the work. And they themselves went from, I think we were targeting about 40, and they themselves decided, actually, Tay, we can do more than this. So God bless them, they did 100. Dr. Sariya mentioned about me getting her into the scholars work. Actually, like the scholars, as you can imagine, it's a large number of scholars. There was, like, I think Dr. Sariya said 60 plus. I'm not sure of the exact numbers. So you can imagine they represent a diverse range of views. Some of them didn't need me or Dr. Sariya or anyone else to tell them about fostering and adoption. They were on the ball, they got it, and I'm so grateful that they were there. And then there was I think a lot of them who just didn't know and were open to learning. So what I did was I got Core and Bath were involved. We got a lot of managers. Mohammed Bashir was involved. Sonia was there, who's going to speak later. Sonia is a care leaver. So it was really important that the scholars hear from care leavers and hear their experience. And by bringing together professionals with the scholars, with care leavers, and being able to discuss together what are different perspectives, where we were able to come to a common understanding. But in terms of the gender thing, what was very interesting was that some of the scholars, a few initially, when I got involved in the work, I was asked if perhaps a man could do my work. And at that point, I'd actually been doing it for over a year and there was no one else who was doing this work. So my response was like, if there was a man who I felt could represent the work well, I would, send that man. But there isn't. So you've just got me, right? And then in the end, they came back to me and they said, actually, we took it back to the group and said what you've said. And now a lot of the scholars are saying that if you're not involved, then they don't see what the point is of the work. So I guess it's about, like I feel God guided me to this work, but I feel like God guided somebody who's quite strong-minded as well. And I feel that it needed that someone who can say, actually, no, that's not right. Recently, like you mentioned, I've done the fasting guidance. So the reason the fasting guidance came about was because at the beginning of Ramadan, I had social workers and foster carers asking me about how a non-Muslim carer of a Muslim child can support that child through Ramadan. So I thought, I'll just put together this guidance, got a bunch of people to endorse it, sent it out to the directors of children's services, was received really well. But again, there is the barrier of politics and sometimes the sectarianism. So one organization called me up and said, one of the people who are endorsing your document, we don't really align with their views. So could you remove that person off your document? And I said, well, no, I can't, because we're not an organization. This is me with a bunch of individual people who are endorsing this document. We're not affiliated with each other, but also I'm not going to be political. And I also said to that person that, look, as Muslims, we should be able to get under the umbrella of trying to help orphans. Like whatever our views are regarding other things, regarding hijab, regarding, other things that people might have issues about. Surely when it comes to orphans, when I say orphans, I mean in the Islamic sense, by the way, so I mean like children without the appropriate parenting support. So when it comes to yatim, right, surely we should all put our differences aside and all just say, for this one thing, we will all work together. And the response was, well, we don't really have much time for this. There's a lot of us. So can we, there's not going to be enough time for us to endorse this at this time. And I said, that's fine. Look, we're going to push it out again every year. So before I push it out again next Ramadan, you can decide yourself. And then there was another organization that also said that their endorsement policy wasn't ratified. And I thought, okay, I think I know enough now to know that you have an issue with somebody else who's in this. So there's that kind of thing, which for me really irks me, but I stay very kind of steadfast in remembering why I'm doing this. And I'm not, my full-time job is as a QA manager for a fostering provider. I quite happily would just do that. However, from knowing people like Sonia, who will be speaking later, she has motivated me so much. If I've ever felt that, oh God, I can't be bothered with this, I can't be bothered with, the pushback that sometimes there is. And, even from doing the community work, at the time, the staff who were in the Midlands were 3 females. And we would joke about it and say, we need a bearded man to come down And one of the staff in Wakefield was a bearded man. And we would joke with him and say, we need you to come to events. We need you to go speak, call this imam, because actually we know they'll speak to a bearded man, but actually with women, and there was two of them were one of them was hijabi and the other two wasn't. So it was like, well, we know that the welcome is going to be different. And we can't just walk into a mosque and just be like, oh, where's the imam? Or turn up to Friday Jummah prayers. So it can be, there can be these sorts of challenges. But again, for me, it comes back to, yeah, but God chose me to do this. So why did God choose me to do this? And why, even that my faith does drive me a lot. So even with someone like Sonia, it's like, well, the way I met Sonia and the way that things opened up, and the relationship we have, I think, well, I can't not do what I'm doing, knowing someone like Sonia, knowing what she's been through. I have to, whenever an opportunity's come my way to do this work, I have to do it, because this is God guiding me. Recently, I had someone on Facebook, really randomly, but I've met some amazing people on Facebook, I have to say. But this one person sent me a Word document and this man had been through foster care. And he'd written in this document, it's like a diary about his life. And the things he wrote in there and the things that he shared with me were so personal. I haven't read it all because it's so emotional. I can't read it in one go. But it's things like that I think, yes, it is challenging, but actually if your motivation is for the right reasons, I do believe that routes will open up and paths open up, and where the challenges are, then actually God will guide us around it and through it and actually do better. Like, I never thought that the project would get to where it is. I never thought I would get an MBE, but when I got that MBE, I thought to myself, great, now I can use this to do more. And I think that is kind of working out for me. So I don't know how long I've gone on for. I feel like it's definitely more than 15 minutes. I can't hear you, Arafat.
Okay, this unmute thing is that's a challenge always. Thank you very much, Tay Jiva. That was very insightful hearing from you, and some interesting questions. In particular, what I found, the one thing I would note is sort of the question of gendered authority. So we've talked about gender dynamics as an issue in this conversation, sort of in the familial context, but you're actually highlighting as well in the conversation in the community and with religious scholars and our imams, this sort of the question of authority, who speaks for, who speaks about, but also for the people that it matters. That was very interesting. I would like to now turn to our next speaker, David Pitcher. I can see him already. So while he loads his presentation, I'm going to introduce him. Okay. Dr. David Pitcher is a family court advisor with Cafcass, working with children and families in the courts. David has been a social worker for 35 years and has taken a particular interest in kinship care. So he has edited a book called Inside Kinship Care, published in 2013, together with many published articles and book chapters, as well as a children's book titled Where is Poppy's Panda, published by BAAF in 2009. David's concern for the situation of Muslim young people in care built up over many years in his casework. So issues for two particular families he worked with led him to conduct a study To Another's House with Shabana Jaffer, who was, and the study was published in Adoption and Fostering, the journal Adoption and Fostering, in September 2018. David has had a lifelong interest in Islam and the Arabic language and worked for 4 years with the Sylheti community in Tower Hamlets. David lives in Saltash, Cornwall. He's also involved in the charity Supporting Social Work in Malawi, where he visited in November of 2019. So I'm really glad that David was able to join us today. I'm very much looking forward to his presentation. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Every time I visited Nazreen and Ahmed in their foster home, I knew what I'd find. Nasreen would be alone in her bedroom, having created her own world with gifts from her mum, jewellery, clothing, and a Quran. Ahmed would be downstairs, stomping about, and there'd be stories of his aggressive behaviour and more problems at school. Look, we're meeting their dietary needs, said their foster mum Diane, and showed me a pile of microwavable curries. Then there was Khadija, who, on being removed from her family and placed with a white British couple, said to me, "Am I still a Muslim now?" In my role as a children's guardian and previously as a social worker, including working with the Sylheti Bengali community, as Arafat said, in Tower Hamlets, I've often been called to work with Muslim families. I knew the importance of keeping children safe and also the importance of identity and belonging, and also the reality of racial attitudes. I remember as a student social worker in 1988, placing a Muslim baby, who by now will be in her mid-20s, for adoption, but also beginning to ask about kafala and how it sat, or whether it sat, alongside our ideas of permanence. So, in particular, as a result of working with Nasreen and Ahmed and Khadija, I decided to undertake a structured study of the experience of Muslim children and young people in care. This question seems very rarely raised, so I wanted to make the issue more visible. As a worker with Cafcass, speaking to children every day, it was quite easy for me to undertake this study. Cafcass, the Child and Family Court Advisory Service, is a national organisation, so I could cover the whole country and get data from the whole country. It's got a good system of recording ethnicity and religion, and it's involved with every child who comes into care via a formal route, and of course has a strong commitment to diversity. I did this study with Shabana Jafar, a lawyer from Cafcass, and we approached it in these phases. First, we captured the statistical data from Cafcass. Then we did a review of the literature. And alongside this, we spoke to some of the key thinkers and practitioners, and this is a great privilege in the country. Mohammed Bashir, who's here today, who's a tremendous leader with Active Care Solutions and built up a wonderful group of practitioners and carers. Sarah Ashkane Crabtree, professor at Bournemouth University and co-author of Islam and Social Work. Khalida Khan, who I don't know if she's here, but has done some of this work so long ago and years ago, and it was a real trailblazer. It was a tremendous privilege to meet her. Samia Rahman, director of the Muslim Institute, one of the best writers that I know in terms of integrating Islam and modern thinking. Yunus Alam at Bradford University, who knows more than anyone, I think, about Muslim young people. Right, so to continue. Right, so this is how we did our study. We identified 12 children, well, 13 because 2 were siblings, so 12 sets of children who were either in foster care or who had been in foster care, aged between 13 and 24. So placements had been either nurturing and life-changing, some had been insensitive or close to abusive. Foster carers Muslim or non-Muslim, and we encouraged them with us. We went to see them to talk about their experience, and we included such questions as, did those around you acknowledge your Muslim identity? Have you ever been made to feel uncomfortable because of your faith? What has helped you? And what advice would you give to social workers, judges, or children's guardians like myself? After we'd done this, we brought together the insights from the young people and held 2 focus groups for professionals to test and tease out emerging ideas. Next slide. We called this study To Another's House as a reference to the Quranic verse from An-Nur, which appears to me to capture the complexity of children's experience. Next slide. The Muslim family feeling somehow inviolable and private, yet at the same time, the experience having to be broken through and broken into through fostering. We did not make any claim that our interviews were exhaustive, but what we wanted to do was provide contemporary and authentic voices through qualitative interviews. So we pulled out themes, compared similarities and differences. So let's go on to Zanira. Next slide. Zanira was 24 when we met her, living in a terraced house with her mother. There was no doubt that she could not have remained when she was a child at home with her mum. There was violence and mental illness. So look, what did Zanira tell us? Next slide. She was in a different community. She didn't fit in. She was placed with Muslims, but the Muslims didn't accept her. She still felt like an outsider, so she ran away. Next slide. She was placed with a Sikh family. She so much wanted to fit in that she changed her name, but she said she still felt like an outsider and felt a mixture of respect, guilt, and confusion. Next slide. She ran away. Eventually, after repeated foster placements, she ended up in secure accommodation where, although residential care isn't thought of well at the moment, she at least felt she could be herself, eat halal food, and express herself. And although she was losing interest in her faith and identity, in some ways, meeting a Bengali girl helped to rekindle that faith and identity. Next slide. Let's see how we're doing. If we go to the slide where it says, I feel embarrassed. One of the things that Zanira told us was how difficult it was to reintegrate back into her home community. She still spoke the language, of course, but didn't have the subtlety of language, didn't quite know how to dress, wasn't quite accepted, didn't know how quite to fit in. And of course, the question of marriage and being set up with a partner. She was in a sort of no man's land in many ways. Next slide. This is Amraz. Of course, as we've already heard from Sariya, there are Muslims who come into care through abuse, maybe British Muslims. There are also many unaccompanied asylum seekers who have, in many ways, a very different story. Amraz grew up in Afghanistan. he said he hadn't even realized he was a Muslim. He didn't, things like dietary laws, he didn't realize there were alternatives. He was surrounded completely by the Muslim community. But of course, he couldn't go to the mosque because the Taliban were there. When his father was killed and the Taliban wanted him, his mother arranged an escape. Months later, he woke up in hospital, having been in a refrigerated lorry. And he told us how just amazed he was at, in some ways, the greenness. He didn't speak the language. People were kind, but he couldn't relax. Maybe just go through some of those next slides. So he had a very, very good education. Just stop at where it ends with Amraz. Just stop there. There. But he really did need therapeutic help. We felt he didn't know what had happened to his mother, to his brothers, and to his sisters, and there was no way he could find out because the Red Cross couldn't go into that area. It was too dangerous. So I've chosen, although we obviously spoke to far more children than this, 2 examples: female abused, male unaccompanied asylum seekers. There were many others. Let's have some other quotes. We assembled, of course, from the interviews, that some of them were quite long, fascinating interviews, several hours in length, and hundreds of quotes, in which we put together, analysed and classified. Here are some. Just have a look at those quotes. I can't completely see this, so there. We were shocked at some of the stories that we were told. He says, I was given a pork pie and told it was normal. We had several stories like this of being given food. So often foster children couldn't relax because they always were on guard about what they might be being given to eat. Contact was so important, and although parents may not have been able to care for their children properly or fully, they could use the contact they had with their children really constructively. This young lady needed a prayer to help her through, and Mum used the contact she had with her to teach her that prayer. It was one girl who was placed in a Muslim family with brothers. The Muslim family had boys, and of course that put them in a difficult position because she couldn't mix with the boys and spent so long in her room. Another person felt that she wanted to remove her headscarf, but of course because of that felt she couldn't visit her grandparents because they wouldn't have approved. So lots of interesting and confusing situations for these young people. I think, Tay, you mentioned kinship care. One of the things that I wondered was the difficulty of finding placements for Muslim young people. We felt were driving some young people into inappropriate kinship placements. Yes, it might be assumed that the wider family will take on the children, but sometimes they just weren't appropriate. And there were several cases, not in this study, but in the discussions we came across, with elderly grandparents with quite punitive forms of discipline, who in a sense felt pressure to take on the care of children, so that the boxes of appropriate boxes could be ticked. So let's, there. Going on, pointers for practice. Obviously, there were key. Let's start with some key findings. We felt that very often placements were discovered for children in the end, but the early period was so important for children, and often that went quite badly wrong. So I think it's important to get things right from the very beginning. There are still examples of poorly informed practice. Now, this came out of the focus groups a lot, that for parents whose children come into care, it was tremendously reassuring to know that your child was being brought up in the faith, in the same faith, and it made the placements more stable. But also, as we've said about Zanira, beyond a certain point, it becomes hard for a young person who's not brought up in their community with their faith to reintegrate. I think that's a very, very important point, which I've seen in several instances. Confidence is lost, acceptance is lost. I remember the siblings that we interviewed couldn't go to a wedding because they didn't know how to behave, and gradually became isolated from the wider family. Pointers for practice. The need for literature and online information. Several other young people said when we first came into care, it would really help us to have something to look at, either online or a little booklet, to be able to tell us about our experience, what to expect, maybe communicate with other young people in the same situation. An independent visitor or befriender could make a tremendous difference to a child who wasn't placed in a matched placement. And that befriender could give advice and training and support to the foster parents. The availability of suitable placements from the beginning is really important. As I say, often people found their way to suitable placements in due course, but through a multiple line of unsuitable placements that scarred them to some extent. And finally, simple measures can go a long way. Somebody who takes the trouble, as I think Sariya said, of going shopping with a child and identifying the food that they want, providing a prayer mat, just something as simple as that. You haven't got to change the world, but just things to show that you're thoughtful does go a hugely long way. So just as we draw to a close, some of these lessons will be transferable to other groups, but there is something distinctive about Islam, including having to surmount many negative reactions. There are, as time goes on, an increasing number of children from dual or complex backgrounds, those who rejected their faith, those of mixed heritage, children from a hybrid youth culture. The government is keen to promote British values, but this generation is becoming integrated at the cost of always being on the outside. And I always think is an important reading is Raghi Omar's Only Half of Me, Being a Muslim in Britain. It's a really good read, and I recommend it to anybody who hasn't read it. And so in this way, children who are fostered may be a more intense example of what is happening in many parts of society, with the benefits and the loss that this brings. As one young person told me, it was weird. I didn't understand. Everyone was so nice, but no one understood what I'd lost. And by the way, Nasri and Ahmed did go back home to their mother. Given their mother's health, it was a risky decision. Sometime later, I called to see them at their home, and they were doing better than ever. I think they were enriched by their experience, but can this be said of all children? Thank you.
Thank you, David. We would like to move on, but I'll just ask a quick question from Catherine Hoffman about whether you could tell us about the different needs or reflections by the age of the children that you interviewed for the project.
Yes, well, we decided to start at about 13 because I think below that, I think children were very aware of their background in that situation, and they could also explain their situation quite clearly, and you didn't have the complexity of possible adoption. I think in terms of their age, I think the younger children would clearly much more settle into their foster family and take on their values, and would be much more liable to move away from their home community unless there were particular efforts to support them. So I think children of 12, 13 are quite vulnerable to losing unless particular efforts are made. And of course, children want to become part of their new family. But of course, if placements break down or they run away and so on, they become very confused. There did seem to be this thought of a kind of insensitivity that placed them with another Asian family, or place them with even another Muslim family who may come from a very different tradition. Kosovan Muslim, for example, may have a very different way of doing things to maybe a Bangladeshi family, Bengali family. I think there was quite a lot of ignorance in that way. But of course, there was also enrichment and sharing, and people were telling me, I now understand how British people think and work in a way that I would never have done that, and I'm actually sort of richer for it. So it was a mix of things.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I would like to invite our roundtable panelists to come on, and I would like to ask you, David, and Tay as well, to stay on, so to speak, so you can make your cameras visible. I will request, I'll hand over the floor, so to speak, to Dr. Sariya, if she can come on. I don't know if she's ready. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we are waiting for Sonia Hamdani and Sabbir Ahmed. If you're able to unmute your video, please, and join us, and we can begin the conversation. Okay, so the floor is yours, Dr. Sariya.
So again, absolute honor to chair this with people who are experts, I think, better experts than me, and people who've got lived experience. So in addition to David and Tay, whom you all have both heard speaking, this panel, we're joined by Mohammed Bashir, who's a long-time social worker and who informed and supported my research in different ways, but who I believe leads voluntary sector fostering agency. But I'm going to leave everybody to introduce themselves in a minute. Sonia, and I think we may have met once, and then she's experienced foster care and has lived experience of this whole area. And I cannot reiterate how much lived experience and understanding of it is important in if you have to begin to address some of the problems in this area. Then finally, Sabbir Ahmed, and I believe you're a foster carer. But Mohammed, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Okay. Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
I've been working in social work for over 20 years, but in particular in fostering over the last 10 years. And it's a real privilege. Can I just say that all the people that I've heard today, I've been here absolutely roasting in my room, but hearing everybody, and I've learned so much from all the speakers from around the world. I do really want to make a special mention about Dr. Sariya and also David, who I met a number of years ago, who I believe was a bit of a forerunner in this area. and also Tay as well, who really took the bull by the horns in terms of the Islamic guidance that was published, because that was a real challenge at the beginning when we were trying to recruit foster carers. So a big thank you to everybody, and I'll let you move on to the next person. Then I'll come back in, Dr. Sariya, if I can later.
Thank you for that quick introduction, and thank you again for your kind words. Sonia, would you please like to introduce yourself briefly?
Assalamualaikum. I'm quite nervous, so I'm just going to tell everybody that I am quite nervous.
Oh, that's fine. I'm always nervous. I just pretend.
Okay. So my name is Sonia Hamdani, and I'm 29 years old. I was placed in care in 1993 at the age of 2. And it was due to my mother's poor mental health. So she had bipolar. Now, through my journey, I was placed in various different kinds of homes. So I was placed in several foster homes, a semi-secure unit at one time. That was because I was running away quite a bit. Also, thereafter into children's homes, because after you leave a semi-secure unit, the professionals here or social workers will know that they then believe that you're not probably fit to be placed in a foster home. So they would try and place you somewhere between. So then I was placed from a foster home to a semi-secure and then into a children's home. After which I was then placed into a hostel for a short while, and then I went into independent living. So I had I had an experience where I went through quite all of the kind of homes that they were able to provide effectively in the system at that time. Now, between the ages of 2 and 14 years old, I was placed for short periods of time back with my mother. And this was due to the fact that she was deemed fit at the time, because, as I said, she had a mental health illness. But this was obviously short-lived. So what it would mean is I would be placed back into care, and that would mean I'd be placed into a different foster home. So as you can imagine, that's why the number of foster homes was quite high, because I'd be short-lived in a foster home, then placed back with my mother, then taken back into care. So it's quite unstable till the age of 14. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
My little cousin here, sorry. So my foster placements were not always matched well with my needs. So I was placed with quite a few non-Muslim families, and they didn't encourage my culture or my religious education. Things like learning how to cook the traditional food, the Asian clothing, the religious occasions, even the religious traditions and mannerisms that you have with your elders and so on, which I just didn't completely understand until I started going into higher education and meeting people of similar background to me and realizing I didn't fit in because I just didn't understand them and they didn't understand me. And it was quite hard, because it really did kind of, it pushed my identity crisis. Where did I fit in? Who was I? I didn't kind of fit into the Asian community because I didn't have that understanding. And yet I wasn't, my foster families were not Asian, they were white or black, and I wasn't of that race as well. So my origin was quite hard for me to understand myself. And it obviously in turn had effect on relationships that I built with people and my own community as well. So I do want to say that obviously my placements did give me the ability to explore my religious and cultural beliefs. It wasn't that it was restricted, but they just didn't have the education to know what to teach me. And I think that's really important, that going forward, we do enable foster carers and make sure there's material out there for not just foster carers, but other people, that children who are from whatever religion it may be, and whatever origin or background or culture, that they are given the ability to be able to understand that culture, so that when they do meet people from similar backgrounds, they have an understanding and they're not felt that they are kind of isolated. More so, it's hard being a foster child and not being with your family in the first instance, but that's your first immediate kind of home. And then your second is your community. To then be like completely isolated from your family and then your community, you are just digging a deeper kind of wormhole of kind of depression and isolation for a child. And I did face that at times. I couldn't voice, the other thing was that I couldn't voice these kind of concerns I had at the time, unfortunately. And please do forgive me for the professionals and the social workers. This isn't a dig at you guys, but my social workers were not stable. They were constantly changing. And I have other people that I know that are in care now, and it's the same thing for them. Their social workers are continuously changing. their pet workers, their guardians, etc. And it's due to the fact, I don't know if it's the cutbacks in finance or whatever it may be, or moving on, but it does have a massive effect on the child being able to voice concerns. So these concerns that I had, the identity crisis I had, I wasn't able to voice them to my social worker because my relationship wasn't strong. It was very weak, and it got weaker as every change that happened over the years, to the point where I just kind of gave up on telling them what my issues were or concerns were. And I feel like that happens to a lot of children that are placed in care. When their social workers change, then they feel that they're not able to trust the professionals and they're not able to be heard. And a child needs to be heard for there to be a change. So my spiritual journey itself, that started when I left the parental guardianship of being in foster care. So I was a care leaver, and it was around 18, 19 where I was kind of just finding out who I was. So again, like I said, I touched on it briefly. I did go through a sort of identity crisis. I was trying to find myself. I didn't have that upbringing. I didn't have that education. I didn't know about Islam. I had never prayed my prayer ever in my life. Like I prayed my first salah when I was 19 years old. And I'd learned the ending of this, I just felt like a revert at the time. It was really, really difficult, honestly. And trust me, even when I started going back to Islamic classes, they would look at me expecting me to know things that I didn't know. And I wasn't being able to be treated like a revert, but I wasn't being able to treat it like I had knowledge either. It's very difficult. Sorry, my cousin again, he's like watching Power Rangers. Sorry. So my spiritual journey started when I was 19. And it's been ongoing for the past 10 years. And I'm still feeling at this stage that I'm still learning who I am as well. So as you can imagine, that kind of early education, I'm still catching up now in from 19 to 29. And I still feel far behind in comparison to my peers who are of similar age and similar background to me. But what really did help me at the time, even though I felt there was a stigma attached in the Pakistani community at that time, in that year, then age group. So we're talking 1993 to early 2000. The Pakistani community, I think there was less education about, children, Muslims being in care. And it was that shame and embarrassment of, how can we not look after our own? How can these children go into care? There must have been something else wrong. There must be something wrong with this girl. And maybe she's difficult. So that stigma that was attached within the community, the shame and embarrassment, made it very hard for me to integrate into the community, for them to welcome me with open arms. And I found that was because of the lack of education. But now, thank God, like working with Tay and seeing and being out there and being involved in some of the work and kind of promoting it as well, I've seen that with this education, with this guidance, it is helping. Muslims are actually now, the community is understanding that we do have issues within our community, that it's not about being embarrassed or shameful. It's something we need to deal with head on, and it is having an effect on the children who are then in turn placed in care, and then do need a community that's going to welcome them with open arms and help them rebuild their self-confidence within the community and their self of identity. So I think what would work well in future for this to be prevented is things like what David and Tay have touched on, is having that material out there, so people are educated, training, of course. It's just an educational process. It's just being able to ensure that people who are going to look after a certain type of religious background of children are given that education and guidelines and material to be able to kind of guide that child. So when the questions do arise, when these situations arise, they're well prepared and they're not felt isolated or kind of stuck in how to respond. And more so, I think it'd be really important that these children are given some sort of mentor, because we do understand that going forward, professionals, it is hard to keep professionals to stay in one job, such as social work. Unfortunately, it's just, that is the reality. And these children are constantly going through changes, whether it's with homes, their families. One thing needs to be stable. And if it's a mentor or somebody that can be linked to that child, like you said, befriended, maybe somebody that can befriend them, that can stay with them, that can actually help them through this journey that they have, which is obviously quite a long journey. And I think that's all I have to say about this.
Thank you, Sonia. That was, I think what you did there very bravely was bring all the research and the experience, you brought it to life with your own experience. And I think you were much more eloquent than any of us. So thank you for that. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask Sabbir to please give us 5 minutes of your 5 minutes reflection. I'll be quite strict with that because I'm looking at the time. I will then ask Brother Bashir to give us a further 5 minutes, and then hopefully we can open it up to some question and answers. Arafat says to me we can go up to 7. So if people can stick around till then, that would be brilliant. But Sabbir, over to you. Can you give us a good 5-minute reflection, please, on your experiences as a foster carer? And I will say on a personal note, I'm very grateful to foster carers like yourself who looked after my children before they came to me. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon everybody.
Islam.
I've been a foster carer now for, I forget how many years it is. And our journey to becoming a foster carer was quite difficult because we faced many hurdles of rejection, refusals from various local authorities, from various fostering agencies. And our last straw and our last hit was with Active Care Solutions. And Mohammed Bashir, alhamdulillah, mashallah, bless him, he believed in us straight away. And he nurtured us, he guided us, he was like a father. I still look at him as a father figure for ourselves. And he believed in us, and he's taken us onto this amazing journey. And, we've, throughout our, time as foster carers, we've looked after so many different children of so many different backgrounds, of so many different ethnicities, of so many different religions as well, and different ages, different genders, different complexities. And it's been an amazing journey. And, institutions like Active Care Solutions, had they not been there, my long life passion of becoming a foster carer would not have come into fruition, because after Active Care Solutions, I was about to give up to becoming a foster carer. And alhamdulillah, that agency came in, Mohammed Bashir came in, and he sort of like encapsulated us and sort of took us onto this journey. Now, as a foster carer, I've experienced a lot of difficulties in this journey. And, we look at children, we should look at children as a holistic thing, where we look at their dietary needs, we look at their safeguarding, we look at their education, we look at their health, their social, everything. But I think one of the things that, we don't look at is the safeguarding of their Iman. And safeguarding of an Iman of a child is fundamental, I believe, and obviously in Islamic belief as well. Without that, the child, I feel, is lost, and the child loses their identity, affects their self-esteem, affects their confidence. And, and I think there aren't enough Muslim foster carers out there. And I think also as Muslims, we ourselves, we sometimes, I think, do a bit of a disservice to our own religion, where we sometimes put off other people from becoming foster carers. When I wanted to become a foster carer, we faced many barriers from our own communities. People, you don't your house, you don't know about their background, they're going to be disruptive to your children, they're going to be disruptive to your family, you're going to have the parda issues, and loads and stuff. It also, at the end of the day, it came to our doctor, who's a Muslim doctor. He was also, trying to sort of like deflect us from not becoming a foster carer, putting so many barriers, because to become a foster carer, firstly, you have to make it in yourself and believe in yourself that you can do it. You need to push yourself, go across the hurdles, and then obviously it's your wife, your children, everyone like that. And then on top of that, you have your friends and families. We found they weren't very helpful. We found professionals who weren't helpful. But alhamdulillah, my father, I always bring him into the picture because I feel I must bring him into the picture, because my father, Allah bless him, and give him Jannah. He's passed away now. When he was born, his mother passed away at childbirth, and he lost his father at the tender age of about 10 or 11. So he was like fostered from one place to another, to a place to another. But he always told us that, even though he never had a mother and father, all those people that looked after him, they looked after him as if he was their child. He did not feel any different in the house. He was made to feel comfortable as one of the own children, with the other children. He was, if the foster parent bought food, it would be the same for him. He was never felt different. He was given the same opportunities in life. He was given the same education opportunities in life, everything. So as he grew up, he always told us, you know, that every child matters, regardless of what's happened to them before, regardless of their background, regardless of whatever's happened. Every child is masoom, meaning innocent, and every child should be given the full attention. You should look at children differently and never hold reservation, and try and give that child the maximum potential to sort of like make the best of their life. But as you know, at that time, this is talking about the 80s and the 70s, my father found it difficult to come into the fostering arena. Even I found it difficult. You know, I'm talking about myself, like 10, 15 years ago, I found it really difficult. So it must have been extremely difficult for my father to become a foster carer. It was definite no. But he used to say, I haven't been able to go on this journey, but I would like one of my children to go on to this journey. And I have sort of like, I feel I've kept to his word and to fulfill his dream, which he couldn't do. And I feel so honored that I've been able to fulfill this dream, to become a foster carer and open our arms, open our heart, and open our homes, open our family to these children. Because when a foster carers, I believe you're not just opening your home, you're opening your heart, you're opening your family as well. Because my children, my wife, my mom are like family to them as well, and I don't see them any differently. So for example, we got this young 11-year-old Bangladeshi child that's come to us quite recently. I am conscious of the time. I won't take more than 3 minutes, by the way. She's come to us and she's got a lot of complexities, and she came to us. I don't want to say too much because, you know, breach of confidentiality, but for her to stay, we had to do an amazing struggle. You know, they believed she could not stay with us due to her complexities, due to her difficulties. The local authority insisted she can't stay. But we seen a child crying out for help, a child saying, you know, not in words, but we could sense the child saying, I will be difficult, I will display difficulties, but I want you to hold me and guide me and take me in. You know, it wasn't words that the child said, but these were the words that we felt the child was saying. And alhamdulillah, it's now been coming up to 4 or 5 months now, this child, and she's still with us. And I think we have got difficulties. It's not like a walk in the park. This child has got difficulties, but alhamdulillah, we haven't given up with this child, because this child was destined to go to a children's home. And this child, we're working with her identity. She's loving it, because she's Bangladeshi, we're Bangladeshi, we understand her dietary needs, we understand her religious needs, and alhamdulillah, you know, it's working very well. And also, one more thing I just wanted to also mention is, like, as foster carers, a lot of times I find we as foster carers in the professional field, we have to explain ourselves that we're Muslims. We have to explain ourselves that I'm a Muslim, I'm not an extremist. I'm a Muslim, I do respect other religion. I am Muslim, I do have respect for women. I am a Muslim, I do see things equally. I am a Muslim, I see things, you know, with transparency, and I have got a clean heart. And I don't look at just taking. I believe in reinvesting back into society and to community. And it gets very exhaustive, and it's very sad that sometimes I always have to feel that I have to explain myself for other people's. For example, you see what's happening around the world, extremism and things like that. And sometimes it's very difficult, and it's very emotional as well, where we always have to explain to ourselves. And also, you know, when it comes to social worker, you know, wanting to know about the child's education, child's health, but they don't seem to really be concerned about the child's safeguarding of their Iman. What has been done to, you know, progress them in the Islamic side? What has been done to progress them in their Islamic identity? So, for example, we've got a child who's starting to wear the hijab, because we are quite free in our house. If the child wants to wear the hijab, they can wear the hijab. You know, if they don't want to, they can wear it at a time where they feel it's comfortable and they feel it's right for them to do so. However, you know, in front of, you know, social workers, we feel it's like they don't want to know about this arena. They think if the child's wearing the hijab, there's some kind of force that's been implemented, but that's not the case. So lastly, I'll just wrap up now. I just want to congratulate all those people, yourself, Tay and David, who have met before. David's come to my house before to do one of these questionnaires and things like that, research about this child. And I just want to congratulate everyone to bring this arena about this, Islamic perspective, and how we as Muslims are not, I feel we're not treated fairly in this arena. We see what's happening with the Black Lives Matter, what's happening around the whole world. I think, something about Muslims' lives matter, and what you're doing and bringing on the platform is like Muslim lives matter. So I just want to say thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. And may Allah bless you, and may Allah make this project of yours go into full fruition. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, Sabbir.
Dr. Sariya, can I just make a quick comment?
Yes, I'm going to let you speak for some time now, anyways. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Sabbir. That was really, really inspirational. Thank you for talking both about the barriers, internal and external, because internally I know Muslim communities, there's still that stigma, there is still that detraction, there is still that misunderstanding of religious texts, but also the external, because I have had foster carers say to me, before you, that they wanted to foster, the local authority has sent them back because they said, either you don't speak English very well, or you don't do this, or you're too religious, or you're too little religious, or so thank you for sharing some of those structural challenges as well, and hopefully through the collative work and this forum that Arafat has established, we can continue our discussions. Now, Mohammed, up over to you, because you've not really had the chance to speak to us. So 5 minutes, and then we'll open up the forum for Q&A.
Okay, Dr. Sariya, there's far more qualified people than me talking, so I won't take too long. Just I want to share 3 points that I've learned in the last 20 plus years, having worked both in the voluntary sector, and that's working with charities, working for local authorities, and more recently working in the private sector with independent fostering agencies. One of the things that I've learned is there's an obsession with recruiting foster carers for whatever reason, and each sector has their own reasons why they're trying to recruit foster carers, and I'm not here to judge them on their intentions. But one of the things that I've learned that I really want to share with everybody out there, whether that's adoption or fostering, there's not an infinite supply of these people out there that can serve the needs of children and young people. What I've tried to do, and I've not always succeeded because it's been a trial and error over the years, is to try to recruit people who can meet the needs of children and young people. So, for example, I have some organizations who just want to recruit Muslim foster carers. And I say to them, recruiting Muslim foster carers is not the solution. Recruiting the right types of Muslim people, recruiting people with potential, because there's not many people out there, and listening to Sonia also made me more aware of that. Just recruiting foster carers per se is not the solution either. And I think one of the things that I've done and I've learned is actually doing a lot of educational work in the local communities is very, very important. So, for example, recently, we've had numbers of Muslim people who've applied to us and they've wanted to become foster carers. But actually, when you start unpicking some of the reasons why they want to become foster carers, in some occasions, there's an underlying need in them rather than wanting to foster for the right reasons, as I would say. However, that doesn't mean we rule them out. It's about whether an organization wants to take time to train and to get these people to a certain level. As I said to a foster carer recently who wanted children, young people, and I said to her, I said, look, angels only exist in heaven. And I said, if you want to foster a child, you have to be prepared to go through a process of learning, training, right, and listening to us, working with us. It's not a case of you become a foster carer and then here you are, here's a child, and we go away. Because children, they're not toys. We can't just drop them back off to Argos or a store, because each time a placement breaks down, and listening to Sonia, it causes damage to a person's self-esteem. So I think that's very important. The other thing that's very, very important is to have young people and foster carers themselves being involved in training. So, for example, we have the privilege and honor of Sabbir being a foster carer with us. So I often look at Sabbir being a mentor for other carers. And so we need to make sure that's very important. But I think also we need to have events like we are doing today, not just on a local level or a national level, but actually on an international level, to keep this at the fore and to make sure that we continue to raise the profile of vulnerable children out there, and to make sure that we continue to pass and to share knowledge. So it's not just actually a one-off conference that we're doing, but we continue to share whatever knowledge we have to achieve the greater good. And the greater good is that every child out there has the right to live amongst a loving family. Okay, Dr.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for that. And I think you are right. What we are looking for is not like I'm often, when I go to mosques and community centers, I can feel the pressure to say that we need Muslim children, Muslim carers for Muslim children, and I always resist that, because we don't necessarily need Muslim carers for Muslim children, but we need those carers who are qualified to meet the holistic needs of these children. That includes health, that includes well-being, that includes psychological, mental health needs, but that also includes their faith. And sometimes,
Dr. Sariya, can I just add one more thing?
Go on. You've been very good with time, so go on.
Thank you. I also do a lot of work with non-Muslim foster carers. And I think it's very, very important that we educate our non-Muslim foster carers for two reasons. One, I think there's a community cohesion element to it, that as non-Muslim foster carers out there, they learn about the Muslim faith. They might be able to dispel any myths or any anxieties that we have, right? And also that being a Muslim foster carer isn't necessarily somebody that's brown-skinned and black hair and eyes. Actually, the Muslim religion is spread across many different continents and nationalities. But I think with the non-Muslim foster carers, simply because even if a local authority wanted to place, for example, we do a lot of work in Birmingham. So we have many Muslim children that come into the care system. Now, there isn't enough Muslim foster carers, even if they wanted to do that, to place them with Muslim foster carers. So we have to make sure that our non-Muslim colleagues, be they foster carers and professionals, are also educated, and the mosques and the local community organizations welcome these people so that they learn about the faith, and then they go out there and then they educate people around them. And I think we need to look at it like a ripple effect, so we can spread it across the board. Okay, thank you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and you're right, and we also need to acknowledge that there are carers who are not Muslim, who've been looking after Muslim children for years and who've been doing a pretty good job as well. And I think a lot of my work is about, identifying good practice, sharing it, identifying bad practice, and co-finding strategies to address bad practice. Now I'm going to throw the field open to questions. We have around 10 minutes for 12 minutes for questions, looking at my clock, and then 5 minutes to hand over back to Arafat, because I'm sure he'll have closing comments. So I've been looking. So if you can type your questions into the chat space, I will pick them up from there. Please keep your questions very brief, so that I can pick them up quickly, and I request the speakers to keep your answers brief as well. Now there are already a couple of questions from before. So there's one for David. David, Catherine Hoffman asked you about, can you tell us about the different needs, reflections by age of the children you interviewed in the project?
I think I had that before. I think I answered, well, probably didn't answer it, but I addressed that one before.
Okay.
Really, I think it's about how firmly fixed a child's identity is.
Okay. Any further reflections, or shall we move on? Shall we?
I just think there's something about a lot of Muslim young people are have a very mixed experience of their own identity as they get older, either because they have their own youth culture or because they've been in a variety of different situations, and you don't really have they're in just so many different types of different types of experience. I think you have to be so sensitive to that, where they are, where they're coming from. I mean, some of the Muslim youth cultures are quite different, quite shocking in some ways. But you have to understand that. Yeah.
Absolutely, identity is fluid, and also identity is it is contextual. I mean, I remember the experiences of two Afghani lads who were unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. They got placed at the same time with a very experienced foster carer who wasn't Muslim herself, but who for her local authority had become the quote-unquote Muslim expert, and she was like the honorary Muslim in her mosque. So, she took both young people to the mosque. One young person loved it because that was the kind of background he grew up in, and he was a youngish man, older teenager. The other young person who was similar age hated it because he came from a very secularized background in Afghanistan. Thankfully, this foster carer was able to gauge that difference and then make change how she approached both children. Now, quick question to Tay from Jackie Venables. When children are placed, should they have information on their profiles? There's another question about copies of the Islamic guidance. That's available online. But Tay, over to you, please.
Sorry, Dr. Sariya, what was the question again?
Should young people have a sense of their profiles? I think that is what Jackie asked.
Their profiles. I mean, by profiles, generally the profile is like their age, their ethnicity. I'm assuming you mean background rather than the profile. So when a young person is placed, whether it's adoption or fostering, they should have a sense of their history, of their background. But again, it depends on age as well. So if you've got a 2-year-old child, you're not going to sit there with a 2-year-old and say, oh, this is what happened with your mom. And this goes back to the age question that was asked of David as well. There's such a complex range of factors to consider for how you care for any child that to answer a question like that in 2 minutes it's just impossible, really, which is why foster carers and adopters have to go through such a long assessment process. They have so much training. For foster carers, the training is endless. For adopters, the training is lengthy but continues. So a child has a right to their identity Islamically and according to good social work practice. And the information you give that child has to be age appropriate. In terms of their profile, I mean, the profile is who the child is. So the child already should have some awareness of who they are, what their ethnicity is. Just to add as well, in terms of their religious practice, when I did the fasting guidance recently, one of the things we talked about at length in the fasting guidance, so for children to be supported through Ramadan, is that it's not just about them complying with their religion, it's about their identity and their association with their group. So, for example, when Sonia talks about navigating her identity with other Pakistanis, actually part of that is what do you do during Ramadan? Not because you're a religious Muslim, but because you're Pakistani. Therefore, at Ramadan, you do X, Y, Z. And that, like David said, it isn't the same for everybody, but that is a consideration.
Thank you, Tay. That was reflective, and age appropriateness is key here. So what you tell a 2-year-old would be very different to what you tell a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old. Yet they all have needs around understanding who they are, and so it is complex. It is complex, minefield. We could do another day on that in the near future. But there is a question now to Sabbir, and again, I don't understand the question. It's from Catherine. Same question as for David, from the perspective of a foster parent. I'm going to leave that for a minute. And Catherine, can you please give us some clarity there? Because I don't quite understand the question. Question for Tay. How many people did you recruit when you went around your community events?
What we did, Penny Appeal, we weren't a fostering provider. So what we did is we vetted the referrals and we passed them to fostering providers. We also had fostering providers at our events. Now, to be honest with you, the whole thing was about 4 years ago. So I'm not 100% on the figures, but what I would say is that now I work for UK Fostering, I can say for sure that the number of referrals we get from Muslims in the Midlands region is huge. Like, we don't actively have to recruit in the Midlands region anymore, because what's happened is that the culture for Muslims, for the Midlands, in terms of fostering, from my experience, the stigma is very much reduced. We have enough Muslim foster carers who now are role models in their community. So what we get is lots of referrals from friends, cousins, and it actually fostering fits the Muslim culture so well that, for me, and from what I see from UK Fostering, it's embedded really well in the Midlands region. Sadly, we don't see it so much up north or down south, but my work was based in the Midlands. So hopefully we can build upon that work.
To close the sort of Q&A session, because again, I can see people having to leave, etc. My daughter's sort of banging on the door. Quick reflections from actually 1 minute each, to Sabbir, to Mohammed, and to Sonia. Sonia, what one thing would you like seeing changed over the next few months, next couple of years? What one thing do you think is the priority that us as academics, professionals, activists need to work on? Sonia, do you want to go first?
So I think, as I said before, I think it's just to educate and carry on pushing the material, the guidance material for foster carers, mentors, especially identifying mentors for young people, and just ensuring, inshallah, that they are giving that material, they've got a better understanding, and they're able to communicate that to the children at the appropriate age, and identify at what age what kind of guidance is needed, and all the way up till they are leaving care. So I think that would be the main thing. It's just an educational and training process that needs to be established, continued, and then pushed out. So work that Tay did, for example, in the Midlands, and that kind of domino effect of now people being role models and it's spreading. I think that needs to be kind of copied. That mode needs to be copied again in different areas, so that we have got a strong community. So people are much more aware, Muslims and non-Muslims, being able to ensure that mosques and other places of worship are open to them, so they can learn again and be able to kind of share that knowledge and be able to be well equipped to be able to deal with the children, inshallah. So I think that's
Thank you. Excellent. And when we went around the country talking to social workers, they clearly they wanted to know as well. So I think the field is ripe, and I think we need more collaboration in this area. Mohammed, 1 minute on what you'd like seeing changed based on your 25 years of experience in the foster care system.
Thank you. Just one point very quickly. I would like to see, whether it's the University of Cambridge, but I think I wouldn't like this to be a one-off event. So I think if we can, it was fascinating listening to so many people from around the world and their experiences. So I think we need to have some type of platform where not just the people today, but maybe there's others out there as well who can contribute, and for us to become some type of like a pressure group for positive change out there for children and young people. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. And again, reflect. I think there is room for that. We've been to the DFC and they want to listen. We need this pressure. I think pressure group is a good word. Thank you, Mohammed. Sabbir, last word to you then, please. And the wealth of wisdom that you have.
Oh, Jazakallah khair. I'd just like to say that I've learned a lot from that care leaver. Sorry, I didn't catch her name.
Sonia.
yes, from Sonia, you know, from her sort of like views and, you know, what sort of complexities that she went through, you know, I really feel out for her. And you know, I've taken on what she said, and I'm hoping that I can continue to make, you know, everlasting changes to the children that I look after now and hopefully in the future as well. And also, just one more thing, I hope this pressure group continues, because it's a very much of an eye-opener, and it's helping this platform, which is very misunderstood, to excel. And one thing I'd just like to think about, and you know, if this sort of platform could look into further, is that the looked after children, I feel masjids and madrasas don't want to sort of like take them on. And I feel this this sort of like social element of learning together in the madrasa isn't there. Say, for example, we've got one child who's been told by the social worker that she cannot attend a madrasa because of, you know, because of the way the local authority feel that she is somewhat extreme. So they've said she can't go to a madrasa. Now, I'm not a madrasa teacher, I'm not a Maulana, I'm not a Hafiz or anything like that, but I still feel that that element that child is losing. So I'm trying to fill that element in by myself teaching her. Now she would turn around and say, you're not a madrasa teacher, I really want to go to a madrasa, why can't I go? Now I can't let her go because my hands are tied. So obviously with all the other children that I've looked after as well, one of the major difficulties I found is for the child to go to madrasa. Madrasas are not willing to take looked after children. And if that's something can be addressed and looked into for the future, because I feel it's all these looked after children, they're losing a very, very essential part of their life. It's not just the knowledge, it's the thing about being around people of their age in the community, and to learn together and have that fun element which they're missing at madrasa. Madrasa isn't always just about learning. These sort of things, they stay in your life when you're 20, 30 years later, when you remember that you learned something in a madrasa, in the masjid, and how nice it was. So that's the thing, if I could link that, please. Jazakallah.
Thank you, Sabbir. I think you're absolutely right. I think Muslim leadership, both religious and community leadership, needs to do a lot more. I went to a conference once, leading umbrella, British Muslim umbrella organization. They asked me to speak. They weren't interested about British-born children. They were interested in unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, because that's kind of in the news. And I think I had to emphasize that there are children coming through to foster care who are British-born as well. I'm going to end this now and hand over to Arafat in 1 minute. But I just wanted to offer one last reflection. As I was doing my work, I encountered a young Christian man, a care leaver, who was, and he talks about while he was being in care, he felt alienated on 3 grounds. He felt alienated as a Christian because when he went to Christian groups, they didn't accept him. Good Christians were meant to be, in happy families with a mummy and a daddy and good worship. He felt alienated as a young person because nobody could get, why he was so far hopping, why wasn't he in a family. He also felt alienated because he was gay, and when he went to gay groups, they couldn't understand how a Christian could be gay. This young man felt alienated on account of 3 aspects of his identity. And I just wanted to end with some of the discussions that we are discussing, where we've spent 2 hours, a good few hours talking about in relation to Muslim children. They are equally relevant to children of other faith and other ethnic backgrounds. And while today we focused on Muslim children, we also need to, within our pressure group, without diluting our focus, also think about other children. Final sentence, I'd like to thank Arafat for the brilliant work, all the hard work that he's put in since, I don't know, a year now that you first wrote to me with your plans to organize this. And I'd like to thank Cambridge Islamic Studies for offering him the support, and CRASSH for doing this. But thank you to everybody who supported him. And thank you especially to all the speakers and everybody who's braved the summer heat. We still are 31 people despite being half an hour late. So over to you, Arafat. Thank
you, Dr. Sariya. Thank you all. Thank you, especially for your patience with this, really what is an experimental, I mean, my first Zoom conference. We can only hope and pray that this doesn't become the norm for much, or remain the norm for much too long. I'll just say that, I mean, I can't summarize how much I've learned, really, just in these few hours. I think, as I said at the very beginning, I had realized already in my thinking behind this, this is a big issue. It's a big issue that cuts across not only different sort of areas and aspects of social work and practice and theory, but across borders, literally. Insofar as the Muslim community, and I think Mohammed put it so well, right? Like the Muslim community is this global Muslim community. We have people from different backgrounds, a diverse community. What that means is this sort of there's a lot going on. So I think clearly, for one thing, more of this needs to happen. We need more clarity of information, more insight from specialists, but also from the community at the local level and beyond. And it clearly makes all the difference to know people. I speak as a historian. I spend most of my days reading texts in obscure languages, in my case Arabic, and trying to understand, how Muslims lived their lives in the past. And the texts don't tell the story, and I think that's partly what we're realizing, right? Like what Islamic law says has come down to us at a level that is hard to know and realize and understand until we know the reality of children, in our own lives, in our own world, children who need that care. And so for me, it has been particularly powerful to listen to this last session. Thank you to Sonia, thank you to Sabbir, thank you to Mohammed, thank you to Tay and to David, who have done this work with children in need for so many decades. Thank you to Dr. Sariya for her keynote. And thank you also to the specialists who have been with us since the very morning, for some of them. Thank you to Dr. Nermin Muhta, Najma Yassari, and Rositza Atanasova. So I thank all of the speakers, and I thank all of our audience members who have participated and stayed with us. They have brought their own experiences, and it's been really a privilege to read the comments and the questions that you have posted. As I said, I hope this is not the end. Just in terms of practical notes, we will there is a recording of this event. So the speeches, the talks will be made available online on the CRASSH YouTube channel. And please also keep an eye out for similar or other future events and seminars that can be found on the CRASSH website, crash.cam.ac.uk. I thank again our sponsors, and thank you all. Take care.